this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from beautiful Florida. And tonight our question comes to us from Insomniac Forever. And it's been a long time since Insomniac had a question, but Insomniac is a long-time viewer of the vlog, so I'm glad to hear from Insomniac again. And Insomniac's question is, what happens to really evil people like serial killers when they die? And the first part of my answer to this is that, of course, that term evil is very subjective, and we've done a number of vlogs on this subject, and I would recommend doing a search of the MagickTV vlogs and the word evil to find where we've talked about the ideas of good and evil and how variable these can be. However, Insomniac is asking about something very specific, a serial killer, which I think most people would agree would come under the heading of evil if one is going to use that term at all. And what happens to such people when they die? Well, pretty much the same thing that happens to everyone else. From the pagan point of view, there isn't a special fate after death that comes to people based on what they've done. That comes in the next life, and through the cycle of incarnation. And the afterlife in the spirit world is really not a place of reward and punishment, but rather of rest between lives, where the learning, or if you prefer to think of it that way, the reward and punishment will continue through incarnation. So the real question isn't what happens to them after they die, but what happens to them when they're reborn. And all of those things that they have done will be attachments that they will draw back to them, placing them into situations from which they'll continue to learn these lessons, often in very traumatic ways, because these are very traumatic things. Now, having said that, in the afterlife, the same thing will happen to them that happens to everyone else, although they would obviously have a higher than average likelihood of being caught between the worlds, which happens to people who die in a state of great emotional turmoil, because such people obviously are in great emotional turmoil, and also they would probably have a great deal of fear of crossing over, which can also hold a spirit back. So I would say there'd be a great likelihood that they would not have an easy crossing into the afterlife. But once there, they would have the experience that everyone has, that they would first perceive it as they expect it to be, and then gradually more as it actually is. So if they're expecting something negative, they probably would initially experience that. And if they're not, they wouldn't. But in terms of reward or punishment for their actions, that would not come until rebirth. And another thing to bear in mind is that if you were then to communicate with them as a spirit in the afterlife, you would be dealing with their higher self, and might not find any of those negative aspects at all, because they will not pick these back up until reincarnation. So I realize that might not be what you really wanted to hear, but it is my opinion on the subject, and I hope you find it interesting, and until next time, may you blessed be. Today's vlog is brought to us by the term Boleyn.
Boleyn. At one time, there were a number of variations on the idea of the magical knife, most of which are no longer in general use. One of these divided the magical knife into two instruments, the black-handled athame, used for various magical operations, notably casting the magic circle, and the white-handled boleyn, used to create magical artifacts, such as a wand and various engraved symbols. The athame was considered sacred to the goddess, while the boleyn, or burin, was considered sacred to the god, since it was used in physical operations.